Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 edition of the Hausa International Book and Arts Festival. On this edition of the virtual panel, we'll be speaking with Professor Ibrahim Hamza, who will just briefly give an introduction of who he is. Of course, the session for today is the Hausa people of Brazil. And like you will know, the theme of this year's Hausa International Book and Arts Festival is the Hausa diaspora. We're exploring the diaspora of the Hausa, not just within the West African context, but also in the Middle East, in South America, as well as the Americas. Without much ado, I will introduce Professor Ibrahim Hamza. Prof, welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Malan Sada, for inviting me. My name is, as you have been introduced, is Ibrahim Hamza. I am originally from Kano State. I studied at Usman Danfodio University, Sokoto, and had my first and second degree in history from there before I proceed to Toronto, Canada for my PhD, and then taught at various universities here in Canada and United States. My area of specialization is African history, especially the diaspora studies of Africans in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic world. And I also taught courses in the history of violence and warfare in Africa, at the same time the general history of African continent as well. My topic of discussion today is the influence of Hausa people in Brazil. Most interesting aspect of this presentation is the fact that a lot of us, that is scholars, have studied the history of African diaspora from the perspective of other Africans, but we thought that Hausa people were not part of the Atlantic diaspora. But they were technically one of the most important persons or African people that were taken as slaves across the Atlantic world, especially from the 17th to 18th century. Why do we study the diaspora? Is to let us understand the links between history and tradition. So right now we have found out that the influence of the diaspora in Hausa studies in Brazil is diminished based on the fact that there was a slave revolt, that is in 1835, which led to the destruction of the community. So the end of this presentation is to identify a neglected theme in the history of African diaspora in the Atlantic world, with specific reference to the role played by Hausa people in the making of the Atlantic slave society and its association with Islamic tradition of scholarship among enslaved Africans. The idea of Islamic tradition among slaves is very important in the history of the Atlantic world, because a lot of us tend to think that Africans, when they were taken out of the continent, were either illiterate or docile or people without culture. But the study of African diaspora, especially Muslim diaspora in Atlantic world, we found out that they have established a very strong Islamic culture and Islamic scholarship across the Atlantic world, despite being enslaved. So, to reconstruct the history of Hausa slaves in Brazil, I will discuss two issues: the crisis of ethnic identity and the close relationship with Muslim uprisings in Bahia. Bahia is a region in Brazil which aided in the dispersal of the vast number of persons belonging to Hausa ethnic group. So our biggest problem in understanding African diaspora, especially Hausa, is to identify the people we're talking about. Number one, why do we understand a person to be of Hausa origin? That is what makes a person a Hausa. of Hausa origin. So an important point to begin with is the fact that the study of African diaspora in this field is an interdisciplinary uh, undertaking. Most studies on Bahia sometimes belittle this necessary point. We cannot study any aspect of African diaspora in isolation. Uh, this is from the general picture of the historical forces that led to the dispersal of Africans. So we have to understand each time we see slaves or people of African origin being referred to as Malay. Malay is not people from Mali, but Malay means people of Islamic origin or Muslim origin that were enslaved in Brazil. So among these slaves, we find out that there are also Nago, Tapa, Hausa. These are the people that we found in many Lusophone. Lusophone are the Portuguese-speaking areas, such as in which scholars such as Mina Rodriguez, Roger Bastide, or Antonio Montero describe. They see these Hausa people or Hausa as very uh, very we can call them like heathens because the interpretation they give is based on Catholic religion. That if a person is not a Catholic, that person is a heathen Nagos or Negros, whose soul should only be salvaged through enslavement. So Hausa people in Bahia or in Brazil maintain their identity through the devotion to Islamic culture, in some cases, as in North Africa, through pre-Islamic religious culture such as Bori. So, why do we find a Hausa identity? We find a Hausa identity a person who identify himself as a Hausa uses the language as a form of communication and then adopt to Hausa culture. This is based on what Professor Mahadi Adamu uh, uh, described a person to be of Hausa origin. Unfortunately, when Professor Mahadi Adamu was doing his research, he did not look at the Atlantic world. He concentrated on the dispersal of African of Hausa traders or Hausa persons within West Africa or within North African communities. So, why do you find this very important? Is the fact that if we look at most of the enslaved people, we find that they retain their culture not as slaves, but as people of different cultural background. That is why when Hausa people were described as devil worshippers by the Portuguese masters does not mean to say that Hausa people were engaged in ritual practices. No, they were, for example, each time they want to do something, they say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. That fact that they say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim means they are seeking protection from the shaitan. But the Portuguese would think that Hausas were fanatically devil worshippers or people who are always asking for devil to come to their rescue. So uh, we found out that there are a lot of cultural identities through which we can find uh, people of Hausa origin in Brazil. I have established this using a PowerPoint presentation, which I would like you to share with me, which I would like to share with you, which is here that we have a sketch that French ethnographer Castelnau uh, described many people that he came across to be of Hausa origin. So right now, we said there is somebody called Muhammad. Muhammad, right here, is a person from Kano, whose mother is from Aspen. And then we have Braz of Java, who is a person from Zaria. So you look at the distinctive scarification, these are cultural phenomena that each time we look at somebody from outside Africa, we look at these distinctive cultural features. You cannot find anybody who doesn't come from this area to have this kind of scarification. So we have Braz, and then we have another Munio, Munio from Borno. The second slide will show you they also have their own classification. Next slide is Munio. Okay, so we have So Allah from Adamawa, and we have somebody from Shira in Eastern Hausa. So this pattern of facial marks uh, really give us the perspective that Castro came across Hausa people. And then the next slide, you see Abu Masu, who is Joachim, or is Nago Yoruba, but the next person next to him is from Lapierre Berry. So these are very important cultural phenomena through which we can actually say the Africans that we are identifying in Brazil actually came from Nigerian region or Hausa region. So the other aspect we're trying to find out is language. Linguistics, that is, linguistic characteristic of people actually give rise to an undeniable understanding of their origin. Wherever people go, they speak their own language, even if no one understands them. That is, you find people singing or dancing or interacting with other people, borrowing and at the same time lending their own culture in terms of language, which will give us a fair understanding of who these people were. So I will go straight to this kind of linguistics identification in which Castro found Hausa people to be uh, right. The other one that is inside my presentation, Appendix A. Appendix A in the Microsoft Word that you find these Hausa terms is on page 12. Okay, so I tried very hard to really understand why do we neglect these terms. At the same time, yes, there they are. Nina Rodriguez found out that these are people who have different words that they keep to themselves. So if you see Siu, Kumau, and then you find Sama, and then it means sky. So Kasua in Bahia, that is in Brazilian Hausa, you find that the C is instead of SUA. These are spellings that were not perfected. That is, they were written long before we have standard Hausa orthography. So this you have Wuta, you have Tramunia, and then you have Rana, which is the same thing, Deri, Aradu, Rua, Arziki. All these are part of the vocabularies that the Hausas have retained in Brazil. And you have Ua, and you have the same thing Ua. You have Da, is the same thing with Da. And then you have the other one, Iyaki, and the same thing with Yaki, except that we have the hook car. So Rodriguez, a Portuguese, trying to write down a word that he tries to understand among Africans in Brazil, definitely was one of the first persons to document what is now a forgotten language in African, in Hausa studies, I can say. So Why do we find these names is very important based on the scholarship that they represent. Each time we come across these vocabularies, I was talking to one professor of African history in Brazil. I told him, all these are real Hausa words. He said, are you sure? I said, I'm very sure. Then he said to me, uh, actually, you know what we call rice and beans in Brazil? I said, no. They say rice de Hausa. That is shinkafar Hausa. So I said to him, shinkafar Hausa. He said, no, we call it rice de Hausa. I said, exactly. And then the lady close to him narrated to me. She said to me, in some words in Hausa, it is Hausa, like if a girl is very angry with her boyfriend in Brazil, she call him Banza. I said, Banza, you know Banza, what it means? He said, no, we just call him Banza when we fight with our boyfriends or any person that we care about, and then we feel disappointed. I said, Banza means good for nothing. Then she laughed. She said, that's exactly what we wanted to say. So we have vocabularies that transcend our geographic boundaries. The other aspect that we like to see in the history of Hausa in Brazil is the name of people that were taken as slaves in Brazil. Appendix B will show you that these names were changed. That is, you find somebody in Brazil is called Manuel, and then his name is Mama, and you have somebody called Braz. Uh, his Islamic name is Braz, but his baptismal name is Adam. So you have Mamman from Kano, Braz, which may be Brema from Zaria, is called Adam. Karo is called Manuel, is from Borno. And then we have somebody called Damaturu. He has no name given to him by his Portuguese masters, and he is from Borno. We have Abahama, we have Suleiman, we have Ali, we have Abu Bakr, we have Mamoru from Bagirmi. We have Allah named David from Adamawa, and then we have Usman Francisco from Shira. We have Gurusa, which is Augusto from Zaria. We have Muhammad again, which is Manuel from Katsina, and we have Bawa named Antonio, and then he is from Zaria. We have Greece called Greece, maybe Idris. They call him Kwaku from Lapia, and then we have Medesara from Kano. So all these names, if you look at page 15, which is on the presentation, uh, these are actual names from central northern Nigeria, from Borno, from Katsina, from Lapia Beriberi, from Zamfara, from Katsina, from Zaria, and Shira. And then we are very much lost when we try to say, okay, why these people were not studied uh, as part of our cultural heritage. The reason is very simple. Uh, the reason is that a lot of us, historians and other scholars, don't understand Portuguese. And the Portuguese scholars don't understand Hausa and they don't understand English at the same time. So if they want to study English aspect of African diaspora, they go back into a translated English version of our history. But we have this Appendix C, which is this list we're seeing. These are actual masjids, imams, brotherhood of imams in Brazil. They established masjid, they established mosque. You can see one of them, anyone, Tunde, okay, Tio Obatunde Batismo Francisco Horacio da Costa, and then he has his masjid. Uh, he's a liman. He's an imam. You can see limano. Limano means an imam. And then if you see Mosquita, means he is having his own masjid there, so like this Tio Oba Odum, and then his Lemano the mosquito, the Tabao. So these are both Muslim Hausas and Muslim Yorubas that establish masjids. They also have madrasa, most likely, because they teach their wives Islamic traditions, at the same time maintaining their status as enslaved persons. Some of them freed themselves, they bought their freedom. So we have a whole situation whereby we have brotherhood of imams, and then suddenly in 1800 we have revolution in Hausa society, in which Usman Apodo Jihad was waged. And that had a lot of impact on the perspective of enslaved Africans in Brazil. That is one of the reasons we discovered that the history of the Hausa diaspora in Brazil changed in 1835. There was large influx of enslaved Africans coming from West Africa with the stories of what was going on in Hausaland, in Borno, and other parts of West Africa. That is, there was a jihad going on led by Usman Lamfordio. It is to establish Islamic Caliphate. This is what happened, is against enslavement of free persons. And these people in Brazil, the Hausas, were very much organized, and they led a revolt in which the whole slave society almost toppled the government of Bahia. And the government didn't take it quite lightly. The rebellion was quashed, was brutally quashed. A lot of the scholars were expelled from Brazil, if not killed. And then it became a crime. If we look at some of the samples that we have of Islamic tradition in Bahia, you find in the two appendices that we have Islamic text that the houses have written. Some of them are actually not the text about themselves, but it's Islamic literature, Fatiha, some of them Quranic verses. You look at them, and then we're lucky to find out that they also have these names of the authors that each time at the end of the page you see, they write the persons that was responsible for that authorship. Like this one is Escravos, means a slave, a man, Alexandria de Placido, and then we'll go again, we'll go to the next one. You'll find is having Alexandria also, and then this one, okay, Escravos Domingos Nacho is Hausa. So it's written by a Hausa person. So you have prayer text, prayer books that they have written and preserved among themselves. And then the slave masters made a law that prohibits the transmission of this kind of literature among slaves. So it became like a crime each time for anybody found to be in possession of Islamic text, but they hid them. So when they had them, so many of the enslaved Africans were expelled from Brazil. They were deported to, let's say, Lagos, some of them to Weda, which is in Benin Republic, some of them to Panandafo, some of them at the Sao Tome and Principe. Some of the houses were even deported to Angola and Mozambique. So, but the most important returnees that we have from Brazil are found in Benin Republic and in Lagos, Nigeria. We have a lot of African Hausa people who were migrants, who were deportees from Brazil, who settled in Lagos in 1830s or 1850s and establish a very strong Islamic culture in western part of Nigeria. So that is why you may find a lot of Lagosians having names like Codroso, Antonio, or Roberto. And then there is even a section of a St. Pedro constituency in Delta State called Escravos. Escravos means slave, but they call it Escravos River or Escravos area, in which these are Portuguese names that were used to describe the arrival or their presence in Africa. But Lagos, Nigeria, represent one of the important places in which enslaved houses who left Brazil settle and continue to establish the Islamic literature in West Africa. So what we have here is that slavery is not a very good topic in civilization, in this history of civilization. It is a violent history. It is a system in which identity of persons is taken. It is a system in which a person is not considered human, but with manumission and scholarship, you find out that Hausa people from Brazil were able to regain their identity. Uh, Many of them came back. There is a story of a Borno person who moved to Nigeria and wanted to go back to Borno. He went back to Borno in 1850s and he discovered that his village is no longer there, which means there was warfare in which the whole village that he left after 30 years is no longer there. So he couldn't find anybody in that area because the people who established themselves in his village are now non-Borno speaking people. That's a non-Kanuri people. They are different brand of people. So he couldn't find any member of his relatives. So he came back and met the English slave merchant from Liverpool and told him that he is lost and he may probably have to go back to Brazil where he has more connection in terms of maybe he has children, he has his wives there, and now he came back to Nigeria, his native land, and has been unable to establish himself once again. So there is a proverb of how in Hausa in which they say, "Alkembawa Garunsu," that if you send a slave back to his locality, he's not going to come back. But a lot of these enslaved Africa Hausa people actually maintain both two cultures. They maintain their own indigenous Hausa or Kanuri or Yoruba culture, at the same time establishing the links with the Portuguese culture in West across West African coast. So, can we really find Hausa in Brazil currently? The answer to this question is very hard. We may not be able to find actual Hausa-speaking person in Brazil because the non-existence of these masjids that they established because they were demolished after 1835. So a lot of these houses, people went underground. So they changed their names. They took different culture. They became either Portuguese or Nago, or when they moved to West Africa, they never go back there. Or even if they go back, they just change a new identity because it was considered to be a crime to be associated with any culture that was linked to the 1835 slave rebellion in Brazil. So we need new brand of scholarship. We need to look at the African diaspora, the influence of Hausa in Brazil. To what extent can we understand these vocabularies? To what extent can we understand this Islamic literature that the Hausas have written? If you go to Brazil, the archives and their libraries, especially all libraries, they contain a lot of Islamic texts written by both the Hausas, the Nupes, and the Yorubas, and they represent part of the cultural dynamics of modern Brazilian history. Do we have any professor in Brazil who speaks fluent Hausa? I haven't come across that person yet. So we are looking forward to our colleagues to start looking beyond English or French studies in terms of defining where Hausa people could be found. Hausa people are not only part of the British, French, or German empire, but they are also part of the Portuguese empire, especially in Brazil. So this is my plea to all of us to kindly take a look at this neglected diaspora with the hope that we may, for example, discover maybe Pele come from Katsina or Malumfashi. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. That's very insightful scholastic aspect of the Hausa people's history. Like you mentioned, majority of diaspora studies has always been linked either to the United States or the United Kingdom, and even less with the Hausa diasporic studies. I recently done some research, of course, with the Hausa diaspora in the Middle East, which of course has been there because of the link with Islam in West Africa as well as the Middle East. But it's really interesting to see how the transatlantic slave trade also has taken a lot of Hausa people from hinterland West Africa down to the Americas. I think three things stood up that I will just add and maybe ask some questions in the next 15 minutes before we round up.
Right.
You mentioned the Bahia slave revolt,
Yes.
which is quite interesting, and that and the aspect of returnees. I don't know if you could like expand on that. Like we have returnees who was it after the slave revolt that they decided to come back to find their villages, and then when they come to West Africa, those villages are not existing. Was it because of the British colonization that the villages were not existing, or was it the jihad of Usman Danfodio?
Actually, they arrived before the British colonization. They arrived in 1850s, long before British has any interest in colonizing any part of Nigeria. Apart from the colony of Lagos, no part of Nigeria was under direct British control. So this crisis came as a result of the jihad movement in Sokoto Caliphate and the also crisis between Nupe Kingdom and the Yoruba the kingdoms that as a result of the jihad movements that a lot of the areas where we found these people trying to go back is actually under the influence of these upheavals. We know that there was crisis between Sokoto Caliphate and Borno, using the famous Mohammed Bello Al-Kanemi correspondence in which Borno people say you cannot wage jihad in an Islamic state, especially Borno with the oldest tradition of Islamic scholarship. And then we have Mohammed Bello's reference to many un-Islamic practices in which jihad could be justified. So we have Ghani Mukhtar and so many big issues. So from 1800, from 1804, I can say, up to 1860, a lot of upheavals took place. You took away the dominant political power, that is the Harpe people, or that is, I don't like to use the term Harpe because it gives prominence to Fulani jihadists to say, okay, now Harpe. But you take away the traditional ruling elite, and then you replace them with another one. And then you have upheaval at the same time. Enslavement of people is a very lucrative business when you have a crisis taking place, either through religion or through political fragmentation. That is why the returnees couldn't find their villages because when you have the jihad taking place, especially when you look at the Shira area, Ningi area, Bauchi area, you find displacement of people. And the same thing with Niger area, Niger confluence, especially the Nupe Kingdom. They're also affected by the jihad movement. And then as a result of this jihad, you find the old Oyo Empire collapse. So when Oyo Empire collapsed, you have the Alapinate taking over from the old Oyo kingdoms. So certainly many places will be destroyed. Many villages will be abandoned so that they move to a much safer metropolitan areas, such as Bida, for example, could be a much bigger than it was before the jihad. So that is the reason why these people couldn't find their villages when they came back after 30 years.
That's very interesting. And I think it's one aspect of history also that is not so much documented, especially in diasporic studies. The fact that the Hausa history even before British colonization, which is like now showing a huge deal of erasure of identity of a lot of people in this part. One final question that I wanted to ask is, of course, in Lagos now we know the famous Brazilian quarter in Lagos, which
Right.
initially we always assumed it's very linked to, of course, returnees that came from Brazil, which mostly now people identify as Yoruba. So it's interesting that you mentioned that it might also be that those returnees were actually also Hausa slaves that were returned back. Can you maybe expatiate on that aspect?
Yeah, yes, we always tease Lagos people to tell them that what is the name of the area in which the government house in Lagos was established?
That's
Do you know the
Alausa.
name of the place where Lagos government house in Lagos? What the
That's
area name?
Alausa, yes?
Alausa. Okay, what Alausa? So it's so the area is borrowed from Hausa people. They established themselves long before the British, long before the Yoruba claimed over many parts of Lagos. We're not saying that Hausa established Lagos. No, they are part of the most successful business people, entrepreneurs, scholars, landowners that resettle. They resettled before the British colonization, and then they established themselves as both Portuguese traders because they know Portuguese. They can go back to Brazil. They can go to Benin Republic. They know every aspect of this trade between Atlantic Africa and the European part of the Atlantic. So you have this situation in which the Hausa people are not, I can say they are not strangers to Lagos. They are part of Lagos. And it's very misleading to say, oh, Hausas just immigrants. They are not Chirani kind of people. They are settled people. If you can say Kodorsa or Aguda are Yoruba from Lagos or Tinubu are Yoruba Lagos, you find that many people living in Lagos of Hausa origin, especially in the Brazil quarters, have more claims to Lagos origin than many Yoruba speaking people. I'm not giving this as a kind of divisive interpretation of Lagos history, but we cannot deny the fact that the largest, or so far one of the most important contributors of the history and development of Lagos were Hausa people.
That's very interesting. It's a lot to delve into. I'm sure we'll love to discuss a lot more of this, maybe on a different platform, on a different aspect. If you are just joining us, this is still the Hausa International Book and Arts Festival. We've been discussing with Professor Ibrahim Hamza, Hamza of the history of the Hausa people, especially in the Brazil as well as the Americas. I will just ask one final question and then allow Prof also to give us his final thoughts on this matter before we call it a close. For me, I'm just really interested. I know the slavery before then was a very lucrative business in Hausa land. You mentioned with the coming of the jihad, did that we will say did that stop slavery from northern Nigeria, or did it just stop slavery with Muslims? Did it continue with, say, non-Muslims or pagan worshippers even after the jihad? Did the slave also stop going to the Americas, or was it still being conducted in that manner?
Okay. It changed. Enslavement of people, there was a correspondence between Mohammed Bello and Clapperton. Clapperton was a famous British spy who came uh, as an explorer. He died in Jegebe. People of Jegebe village, they have his grave still there. So the issue is that slavery became prominent during the jihad period because you have warfare. When you have warfare, you have captives. But what Mohammed Bello tried to do was that he said to the British, if you want to suppress Atlantic slave trade, help us stop the export of slaves towards the coastal region of Africa. If we stop the supply of slaves to the coastal region, and then the internal slave trade can be controlled. And then so people say, oh, Mohammed Bello was a Muslim Wilberforce. You know, William Wilberforce was the British politician who put forward the movement to suppress slave trade across the Atlantic Wall and in the British Empire. So long before Nigeria or Sokoto Caliphate became conquered by the British, there was this correspondence in which how can we control export of slaves across the Atlantic Wall? If the British really wanted that to stop, they can cooperate with the House, with the Sokoto Caliphate, and then the export can be stopped. And then we say, okay, what of the internal slave trade? That there is a huge number of slaves within the Sokoto Caliphate. And then those taken across this trans-Saharan trade also. What do we do with them? Then we look at the social dynamics of Mohammed Bello, in which he said, if you cannot justifiably fight a jihad as a result of Islamic teaching, you cannot enslave people. There is no way we can use slavery as a pretense for jihad movements in West Africa. Unfortunately, after the jihad, a lot of the rulers of Hausa land became large slave owners. Under the pretense of spreading Islamic religion, they can easily send an expedition to go to the non-Muslim areas to as raid to conquer them or to take some slaves, bring them back into the Gandu system. So technically, slave rates increased as a result of the jihad movement. But after the jihad movement, with the establishment of the Central Emirate system, majority of the enslaved persons were enemies of the caliphate. For example, I'm sorry, throughout the history of Sokoto Caliphate, Maradi, Damagaram, for example, Ningi, kept fighting many emirates of Hausa land. Okay, so if it's only with the coming of the Europeans that Ningi, Maradi, Damagaram stopped fighting the central emirates of Hausa land. So you can say, okay, so from 1800 up to 1890s, there were upheavals, but there was no export in large number compared to what happened before the jihad of slaves across the Atlantic Ocean. I hope I answered that question.
Brilliantly, brilliantly. Thank you very much, Prof.
You're
If you're just joining us, it's been a wonderful session discussing the Hausa diaspora in Brazil, as well as a whole lot of other issues. I have been chatting with Professor Ibrahim Hamza, and I think we are almost at the end of this session. So I will just allow Prof to just give us his final words in 1 or 2 minutes before we round up.
Right. My plea to our scholars is to try as much as we can to study the history of Hausa people, both in Hausa land and overseas. We have Hausa living in Turkey, in Turkey. We have Hausa that found themselves way back into the Russian Empire, and we have Hausa people not even in Islamic land, especially in Saudi Arabia, but we have them across the Atlantic world. If we want to look at this diasporic expansion of Hausa people, we find out that they were traders, they were entrepreneurs. Without them, a lot of trade links in Africa will never be successful. There was a statement in which famous a European explorer said there were 3 cities in Africa in which if you're looking for anything, you can find them. If you cannot find them in those cities, it does not exist in Africa. The first city is Cairo, Al-Qahira. The second city is Fez, and the third city is Kano. 3 cities in Africa in which whatever you're looking for in terms of luxury, in terms of trade links, you will be able to find merchandise that is available in Africa from those 3 cities, Cairo, Fez, and Kano. I hope many people will understand that it takes only 40 days between Kano to Tripoli, long before the coming of Europeans. Now I will ask anybody, if you want to go to Tripoli, how long will it take you? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. And interestingly, tomorrow the House International Book and Arts Festival begin in one of these 3 cities in Kano. It will be difficult for us, I'm sure, to move from Kano to Tripoli in those amount of times. But thank you so much, Prof. We really appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.